Aithiawi saw the stage again and realized that she daydreamed through most of the reenactment. 11 years stuck on Duchiff. A soft bark of a laugh escaped her mouth to fight off the pang of chagrin she felt as she reflected on her lost fortune back on Erissus III. After that 1 year had passed, she thought to argue that she meant Gillith Galactic Standard Time, not Erissus III time. But besides the fact that it was a lie, it was also a moot point. She was never able to contact Phaedra again. The dark young woman shook her head with a wistful smile. These celebrations always set her mind to drifting. She looked to the sky. Late twilight, then down to the stage. The night's program had already covered her reemergence from the Starhopper, glossing over, as it always did, the weeks she struggled with bouts of nausea and diarrhea and misery as her body adjusted to living on Duchiff without any of the recreational drugs she'd become dependent on, and the weeks after that, when she fell into a depression at the loss of Yanden, the Yun-Chi, the rest of her friends, and to a lesser extent, her family. Aithiawi took a deep breath to help settle her feelings, but her eyes started to sting all the same. She got fidgety and tried to focus on the stage. The dramatization of her eventual acceptance of the Muziengu as her people, and the choosing of the first of the Tanagish, the first of her harem, had also long since passed. Speaking of which, she looked to her right, to Umerit, still out of his seat, whipping his tail, stomping his feet, and yelling encouragement to her representative on stage as the actress there replayed Aithiawi's role in leading the Muziengu to their first decisive victory in the war against the Hudapash, a small nation of natives who used to claim the coastal regions south of Muziengu lands. Word of Rajan Alam's death had traveled far back then, and the Hudapash king thought it wise to test the Muziengu and their new god. Feeling more than a little restless from the emotions her memories brought about, Aithiawi leapt from her seat and rushed down the aisle toward the stage. The layers and layers of her bright white ceremonial robes flapped and snapped with her every step. A rumble of surprised uncertainty rippled through the audience as she raced toward the stage. Shrieks of sudden excitement erupted as Aithiawi drew the legendary Lojazi Raka. At the bottom of the amphitheater, she mounted the stage. Everyone in attendance rose to their feet. The Tanagish, led by a puzzled and alarmed Umerit, rushed down the aisle after her. The actors engrossed in the drama on stage didn't even notice that anything was amiss until Aithiawi was already among them. And to their credit, they only paused for a beat, long enough for Aithiawi to scream a bloody death to the Hudapash king as she leapt into the reenactment with her characteristically wild fury. The actors all echoed their god's call and rejoined the simulated fray with a blood-curdling battle cry. Even the actress playing Aithiawi got caught up in the moment and joined the fight, completely forgetting her role. The audience nearly came to riot. Their cheers were deafening. Even for the unpredictable deliverer, this was an unexpected act. Umerit and the Tanagish had spread out to cover the entire front of the stage. Boots stomping wet in the gutter, hands banging flat against the wood of the stage floor, chanting with overwhelming pride at the skill with which Aithiawi wielded the light-warping Lojazi Raka. And that skill, along with the unorthodox acrobatics of her fighting style, had the entire audience squealing with delight. Her intensive training with the otherworldly Ragoga showed clearly in her every move as she slung the Judge of Shadows through the air, getting it close enough to tickle the body hairs of an actor before pulling it away at the last instant. And all the while, the strange weapon spun chaotically, twisting the look of everything within an arm's reach. The actors all played their parts expertly, falling in great mobs before the wrath of the deliverer, breaking up painted panels of arrows to be consumed by the Lojazi Raka, felling stage trees in the great weapon's wake, and launching papier-mâché chunks of earth at the enemy as Aithiawi swung the mighty Ragoga low. At the end of the scene, when Aithiawi lifted the beaten and battered puppet body of the Hudapash king in the air to signal the end of his reign over the lands to the south, the crush of sound from the Muziengu could be heard from almost a kilometer away. After that, the night's program was completely scrapped. With praises of thanks and adoration, the Tanagish climbed onto the stage to hoist a flushed and gleeful Aethiawi up onto their shoulders. Everyone in attendance took up the chant of their deliverance, and with the Tanagish in the lead, an exultant procession formed as they all danced out of the bowl-shaped amphitheater, their beloved goddess laughing in the air. Spinning lazily below, the Lojazi Raka floated alongside the celebration, a small globe of disturbance obediently trailing its master's hand. Aethiawi couldn't remember a happier time in her life. One of the revelers in the procession let out a long, drawn-out scream, and all the Muziengu loudly repeated the call. Still carried high by the Tanagish, Aethiawi just knew she'd be hoarse in the morning, but she closed her eyes and screamed along with all the rest of them. And as the jovial procession continued out onto the field of devotion, an enormous irregular shadow broke the perfect disk of Chiff, looming large and bright in the star-filled heavens above. The darkness of the night deepened, hundreds of heads turned to the sky, and the screams of the Muziengu quickly changed from being filled with joy to being filled with dread. Umedit deftly swung Aethiawi down from his shoulders, and the Tanagish immediately ushered her toward the divine compound near the Temple of Deliverance, formerly cursed by the natives as the Temple of the Great Retributor, home of Raja Nalum. More than a little disoriented by the abrupt end to their celebration, Aethiawi looked around frantically to get some sense of the emergency, but all she could manage between the pushing and the pulling of the Tanagish around her were fleeting glimpses of panicked Muziengu, their faces shielded, hands twisted in curses to the sky. She looked up. The irregular shadow eased further into the light of Great Chiff, and being so high in orbit, the last light of day still glowed hot against the hard lines and angles of its side. The sight stopped Aethiawi dead in her tracks. Recognition took her breath. Like everyone else schooled in the wedge, its image was burned into her mind. The shadow in the sky, like a hawk before the kill. Silent, beautiful, ominous. The vanguard of a Jillith expeditionary force. The Muziengu were doomed. "My lord!" The Tanagish had regrouped around Aethiawi, as confused about her refusal to move as they were about the shadow in the sky. "We must get you to safety, to shelter. Sidrigat!" The muted curse slipped from Aethiawi's mouth. Everything she'd grown to love here on Duchiff was about to be pillaged and exploited by the Wedge's cloud-born rulers. And as if on cue, a tiny sparkling shape broke away from the main mass of the gargantuan ship to float casually down to the surface. A Gixin Jail, the first of Duchiff's new masters. "My lord!" Umedit begged Aethiawi to keep moving and tugged at her arm. "No!" she shouted with an anguish and a hatred so strong all her husbands took a step back. "Tanagish!" she bellowed. "With me!" And at that, she bolted across the field of devotion, past the giant metal sculptures illustrating the Muziengu creation myth, directly toward the Temple of Deliverance. The Starhopper, perched on its top, was garishly decorated like some primitive horse-drawn carriage. "We have to stop them before they get a chance to set up an orbital PRF gate," she yelled to the Tanagish. And her harem, having no idea what her words meant, drew their deadly blades and cried out, "For the Deliverer!" as they ran. Their shadows flickered along the ground in the fickle light of the hundreds of festive braziers set around the plain. High in the atmosphere, more tiny sparkling shapes broke off from the main mass of the vanguard as the gargantuan ship continued to slide silently across the bright disk of Chiff. Closer to the ground, the first of the descending Gixins took notice of the small, tightly organized group of Aethiawi and her Tanagish, and rightly assessed their importance to the locals. The creature angled its warping, released its alignment with the planet's magnetic field, and dove toward the surface. Nearing the stairs leading up to the Temple of Deliverance, the giant invader fragmented into a kaleidoscopic rain of colossal distortions. A light haze of grass and dirt jumped into the air as the Gixin Jael slammed into the ground between the dark young woman, her Muziengu guardians, and their goal. As the monster began to speak, a warm glow permeated its form, and its voice was like the flow of clear waters. "The glory of the heavens is upon you." The Tanagish all slid to a hard stop, Umerit foremost among them. "The god's tongue!" he said, awestruck. The Gixen's silky smooth voice stuttered to a stop. Its panes of distortion slipped briefly out of sight with the creature's confusion. It had led to subjugation of several unresonated systems, but it had never encountered another species that had already spoken Udo-Gensalot. While the Tanagish recovered from gaping open-mouthed at the Gixen Jael, Aethiawi raced forward, the Muziengu's dark god of wrath, wreathed in a hurricane of fury by her wind-whipped clothes. The Lojazi Raka, an angry dark moon in her orbit, bent the light all around, becoming darker somehow, and more massive than should be possible. Closing in on the giant invader, Aethiawi swung her arm upward to launch the legendary Ragoga in a high arc through the air. She then dove into a roll and slapped her hand to the ground at the end of the maneuver to bring the Lojazi Raka crashing down. Unfortunately for the Gixen Jael, its hesitation lasted too long for it to do much more than screech in pain and flash in shock as the Judge of Shadows smashed through its vitreous uncertainty. A crystalline mist of xanthous gore billowed out from the creature's wounds as the Lojazi Raka crashed through layers of the Gixen's accretion to strike the ground beneath it like cannon shot. The monster's orbiting devices fell like a spurt of hail as the rapid approach of death disrupted the creature's invisible grasp. The thunderous violence snapped the Tanagish back into the moment, and they rushed forward to defend their deliverer as she regained her feet in front of the shattered invader. A thin yellow haze settled around them as, moving in boldly, the Tanagish darted back and forth with attacks on the Gixen Jael in its death throes. They slashed and stabbed at the giant's flopping disorientation, but their weapons made little more than noise against the Gixen's armor-like geometry. "Fall back!" Umerit ordered his brothers. "Our blades against this thing are as leaves against a tree. We need stronger arms!" As the Muziengu moved away, the Gixen Jael suffered a particularly violent convulsion, and one of the Tanagish was suddenly crushed, dead. "Veech!" Several of the Tanagish screamed in unison, stunned by the immediacy of their brother's end. Aethiawi glared at the mangled ruin of the fifth of her harem with wide eyes for an instant, and then dashed for the temple stairs as she ordered her husbands to "follow the tiller with your tears." And the phrase meant to shame young Muziengu warriors into suppressing their emotions in the face of duty to the community worked its mental magic. The Tanagish looked up with grim purpose, and, giving the dying giant a wide berth, they skirted around the Gixen Jael to follow their god up to the silver chariot of Chiff. All of them, except Durnd, who couldn't take his eyes off the Gixen's zero blade where it had fallen to the ground. By this time, the huge creature's great convulsions had calmed, allowing Durnd to grab and drag the large alien's blade out of its sheath without lethal interference. The brave Tanagish then rushed after his brothers and the deliverer up the angled side of the temple with a two-handed grip on the huge sword. Behind him, the fat dark blue blade hung back, away, and down from his waist. Above him, Aethiawi and the rest of the Tanagish made their steady way up the pyramid's 2,000 steps. The deliverer's voice echoed across the plain. "They're called Gixen Jael!" she yelled. "And they are not gods!"